New York City had a natural harbor and became a major commercial city second to Philadelphia. Pennsylvania had rivers and lakes. The Hudson River ran from New York City to the state capital, Albany, and beyond. But it was difficult and expensive to haul people and goods west. Travelers could go to Albany, then by mule wagon to the Mohawk River, then overland to Lake Ontario. Lake Erie was blocked by Niagara Falls. The building of the canal was a political act based on the interest of the promoters. Robert Fulton was an early promoter as a steamboat titan. Add to that various land speculators in western New York. DeWitt Clinton, longtime mayor of New York City and governor during most of the Erie construction, was the most prominent politician for the project. It would be called Clinton's Ditch by opponents. The economic reasons were the movement of immigrants west, mostly farmers, and products back to New York City. The major product would be grain, a high volume, low priced commodity. Big infrastructure projects require massive funding. Promoters raised initial cash, and the state legislature created a canal commission, which requested federal funds that were rejected by President Thomas Jefferson and later James Madison. With a state charter, funding was approved and New York issued bonds for the project, mainly sold to banks and European investors. This may have been the first municipal bond issue in the U.S. The tolls collected, net of operating cost, would be used to repay the bond interest and principal. Massive fraud throughout the project was likely. Of course, the construction had to officially start on July 4th. The year was 1817. The Erie project was divided into three parts. The parts starting at the Hudson River at the east end and Lake Erie at the west were the most difficult and required dealing with the rise in elevation. The middle was a relatively flat 100 miles or so, no rivers in the way, and easiest to build. Initial success and getting experience were both economically useful and politically expedient. It was finished in 3 years, and the ceremonial opening had to be on July 4th, 1820. It was then opened to traffic and became a revenue generator. DeWitt Clinton sent surveyor Canvas White, his real name, to Europe to study canal building, including materials and needed equipment. White brought back tools and drawings of the bridges, aqueducts, and culverts that would be needed. Hydraulic cement was essential because it hardens underwater. White experimented with local limestone and created a cement that worked, which he patented. Benjamin Wright served as chief engineer with 2 assistants and later considered the father of American civil engineering. The canal had to be flat, relatively straight, and big enough to haul big loads. The dimensions were to be 40 feet wide at the surface, but tapering to 28 feet wide at the bottom with a depth of 4 feet. Although there were no mountains to contend with, there was the need to deal with changes in elevation, crossing rivers, and building bridges to get from one side to the other. The digging was by hand with picks, shovels, and wheelbarrows, plus the dangerous use of black powder. A towpath at the side of the canal was needed to allow draft animals to tow the canal boats. The changing elevation from around Albany to around Buffalo totaled over 500 feet. That meant locks had to be built to change from one elevation to another. The lock was a watertight box that allowed the canal boat to be put into the lock, the gate would be closed, and sluices used to have the water flowing into the lock to raise the water level or out of it to lower it. Most locks were 90 feet long, 15 feet wide, and 8 feet deep. The aqueduct allowed the canal to be carried over or under a river, road, or ravine. Bridges were used to cross from one side to the other and could be any design or size depending on the need. The middle section was completed in 1820 and toll revenues started flowing. By 1822, 220 miles had been completed and canal bonds became investor favorites with Europeans who then owned a majority of the shares. The big challenges were the 83 locks to be constructed as well as aqueducts and bridges. The canal was completed in mid-1825 at a cost of $8.4 million, 46% over budget, caused by fraud according to a later New York State Assembly report. It didn't matter. The Erie was a commercial success. The 83 locks took effort, but the canal was still finished, allowing Governor Clinton to celebrate by barging from the Buffalo side to New York City and dumping Lake Erie water into the Hudson, of course, on July 4th, which was called the Wedding of the Waters. The canal allowed east-west commerce from New York City to new and soon booming cities like Cincinnati and Chicago. By 1826, 7,000 boatloads moved goods and people, and tolls reached $500,000 annually. That meant large amounts of grain and later lumber and meat moved east. The demand and transportation efficiency meant large grain farms became labor-intensive, highly productive enterprises. Canal revenues exceeded expectations, and the canal bonds were paid off by 1837. New York City became the largest and most commercially successful American city. Railroads became canal competitors, beginning with the 16-mile Mohawk and Albany in 1831. Ironically, the first steam locomotive in New York was called the DeWitt Clinton. Despite the competition, canal traffic continued to flourish and moved about 13 times the freight volume hauled by all the New York railroads in 1850. The Erie would remain a commercial success into the 20th century. More on American railroads next time on Food History and Mystery.